So where does that leave a UnitedHealth group if the PBM's gone? The insurance business has a fixed profit margin. If they no longer have these PBMs as a way to drive drug prices higher, and as a consequence, then they can drive their premiums higher, it's just not going to grow nearly as quickly as it has in the past.
And if you really want to fix this, you've got to fix the business model, because the business model is just raise prices faster than your expenditures. So you have to fix that. And the first step, I think, is dismantling the PBM.
Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Let's start. Once again, we're going to get through exhibits A, B, and C in not too much more than 5 minutes, because we've got a lot of other things to cover. No change on C. I would say on C, clearly there's oversupply of oil. The thing to watch, and the reason oil's stiffened to around 65 or 66, is a possibility that the negotiations with Iran are just stalemated. The U.S. position is they have to give up their centrifuges. The Supreme Leader and the other parts of the Iranian government say that's not possible. So there is an impasse. I don't think the Trump administration and Trump want to put sanctions on Iran. I don't think they ought to allow Israel to go try to destroy the centrifuges with bunker-busting bombs. But it is an impasse, and that has stiffened the price of oil. On natural gas, which is Exhibit B, I'm happy to report that production is just hanging in at 105 or 106. I was afraid it had gotten to that level the first couple of months of the year. I was afraid we'd be 108 or something by this time. We're not. We're still around 106. The interesting thing, people say AI needing power. Natural gas for power is flat year over year. But fortunately, with the Trump administration easing up on LNG export and construction, LNG is very strong. And because of the cold winter, residential commercial is pretty strong. So natural gas does seem to have gotten itself repriced in the $4 range, which is excellent. Exhibit A we talked about last week. The big, beautiful bill doesn't get too much done. I did see a reference. I don't know whether Mike or Jason picked this up, but which spokesman for the administration, but they said they had $60 billion of tariff revenues in April. The excise at all is where tariffs are. It's been running about $240 billion a year. I have it for estimated 26, $400 billion. Obviously, if it's $60 billion a month, that would be $700 billion. And there is some excise tax. It's not all tariffs. So that would help on the deficit, but who knows whether that's an accurate number or what to expect from tariffs. Anything else, Mike or Jason?
China trade deal?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The tariff rate is settling out at 55%, it sounds like, which is higher than expected. But
20 points of that is fentanyl?
20 points of it, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So presumably that could be on the table to come off as well.
35 seems high, ex-fentanyl. Presumably the Chinese can convince us that they're not shipping precursors for fentanyl into Mexico. So it seems to me that 20% ought to be able to be settled. Interesting question is, if I understand, and I'm not as far as reasonably informed as you guys are, but my understanding in reading about the discussions in London were that we really were running out of magnets, which is what the rare earths have turned into. Powerful magnets, and those are used in all kinds of industries. And I think somehow the Chinese just stopped shipping those. I noticed that in one of the print papers this morning, they restricted the supply of drone parts. The drone parts had gone up by, doubled or something. So Chinese make, I don't know what percentage of the drones used in the U.S. for recreational purposes, but I think it's like 80% or something. They had stopped issuing export rights for drone parts. So we needed the magnets, but they needed the NVIDIA chips. And that seemed to be the trade. We'll send you magnets if you ease up and let NVIDIA send us chips. I noticed that the chairman, I guess the founder, although I think most of it's owned by the Calais or something of Huawei, said that they were still quite a ways behind the U.S. So I think that was his campaign to try to put shoulders to the wheel to get more NVIDIA chips moving to China. Is that about the way it looks to the two of you, or?
Yeah, and I think that's a win-win, or that's a win for the U.S. in my opinion. We didn't believe we should be restricting the NVIDIA chips to China that much anyway. It just spurs their innovation, and they really had us bent over barrel with the rare earth minerals. Those go into a lot of very important machines that we use here.
Yeah, electric motors in particular.
Yeah, like MRIs, wind generation, power plants, fighter jets.
So the big picture here, if you look forward to a 35% tariff on China, that's up from about 20% last, the previous 4, 8 years or whatever. Most of that 20% tariff was consumed by China. It didn't really flow through to that much of a price increase. So an additional 15%, we'll see what happens, but it very likely won't have the big inflationary effect that everybody's been concerned about.
Right. And CPI numbers this morning didn't show much inflation. So economists keep saying the tariffs will increase inflation, and maybe they will in June, July, August, or sometime. But through May, there doesn't seem to be much inflation. Where are we on our chips history?
Yeah, so last week we talked about Intel's pivot from producing memory to CPUs and how that was a major change in the business, even though the business had been around for well over a decade at that point. That's a change that would have taken a founder, and if it was a non-founder running the business, it might have been much more difficult to make that change. They were really on the cutting edge of what would ultimately be a really fabulous business. They didn't know at the time that CPUs were going to be necessarily better, but they did see that there was less competition in CPUs. So when they started making CPUs, they were initially going into mainframes and what they called mini computers, which were smaller than mainframes, but larger than what we think of as a regular desktop computer. As the performance of these Intel chips got better, and IBM and Intel worked closer and closer together, they were able to put more performance into a smaller box. And when they came out with the 386, that's really when this x86 architecture that undergirds basically all of Intel's chips today, that was a powerful enough of a processor that you could, it essentially destroyed the entire mini computer market because you could miniaturize everything enough that the performance was good enough in a smaller box and much lower price. It really launched the era that we would refer to as Wintel, or Windows and Intel. And I think in that first instance with the 386, it's Windows 2.0. And then later in 1990, Windows 3.0, which had the first real graphical user interface, that opened up the set of people that were interested in using a computer. A command line text interface really restricted it to a pretty technical person or someone that, a company that was willing to train employees to use it. But this graphical user interface really drew in quite a few more people, and that's when the growth of this Wintel alliance really took off. The interesting thing to think about is that IBM completely got left in the dust in the process. So they're the ones that selected Intel, and they're the ones that said, Intel, you're too small and flighty and undercapitalized of a business for us to rely on, so you've got to cross-license your IP to another company. But as a result of the decisions that IBM made, which were primarily to make the IBM PC ecosystem interchangeable, it enabled competitors like Compaq and HP and later Dell to basically copy everything that IBM was doing. And eventually those smaller, leaner, more nimble companies were able to out-innovate and release products faster than IBM was. And, ultimately, IBM had to cede their business to these lower cost and better performant competitors. So I think that's kind of the big story on that early era as we got into the graphical user interface era.
Adding to your part, software had a big role in this. So IBM selected this startup called Microsoft as well to write the first operating system. And it was text-based, it was DOS. But that really kind of cemented the partnership that Microsoft's going to build an operating system that runs on top of Intel's x86 architecture. And that, continues to this day. And is the success that Microsoft had with later Windows 95 and the graphical user interface, that really allowed Intel to be in, Intel Inside. It was in everyone's PC. But yeah, as you're saying, there's a debate at the time too with the x86 architecture. Does it run on this CISC or RISC instruction set? And so what those mean is a complex instruction set computer or a reduced instruction set computer. What that means ultimately is the operating system is running these instruction sets. So as computing got more powerful and complex, the operating system is asking for more complex instructions to be executed on the processor. And then the debate really is then how much of that instruction set gets baked into the chip. And the more that you add into it, that's the complex instruction set. That's the CISC philosophy. So you add more of the instructions at a hardware level, which enables them to run a lot faster. The trade-offs to that were the processors are harder to design and manufacture, but the software could be less complex. So the software, and at that time, the software had to be loaded completely into memory. And if you could issue shorter instructions to the CPU, but the CPU can execute more complex tasks at the processor level, your software code base is smaller. The instruction set that you write in software is smaller. So you could have more complex software applications loaded into to memory. And memory was a very finite resource at the time. So I think it was the right decision to go with the complex instruction set processors. That allowed you to write more advanced software. And that was a big driver of adoption.
Well, and the big reason that Intel went that direction was that they recognized that the pace at which they were improving processors would mean that the performance of the processors would make up for any performance that you would otherwise get by having a RISC-based processor. You'd make up for it because the next generation of processors would be so much better.
I don't know if I buy it. They could have advanced at a faster pace on RISC probably.
Yeah.
And cheap and at a cheaper price point.
And what's interesting is even during this era, a lot of the high performance workstations that were used for specialized purposes had a lot of RISC-based chips. And by the time Pentium came out, there was a big chunk of the CPU that was actually a RISC architecture. So
next week we'll do GPUs, right? Or haven't we gotten that far?
I think we probably have one more before GPUs, I think.
Okay. We got to save some time for new developments on page 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then some time for healthcare. The Apple Developers Conference is a little flat for Apple, I guess. So the spokesman here is Jason, who's a temptress of Apple software capabilities. So over to you, Jason.
Yeah, I've been bashing them lately, but I do use a lot of Apple products all day, every day. So I just wish their innovation was progressing a little faster. I think the fortunate thing for Apple is they have really good customer lock-in, and myself included, and a lot of us are giving them much more time than most other businesses would have to improve their products. But it seems like today's versions of Apple software are, where in the past, you didn't get the latest and greatest innovation software-wise, but you got a rock-solid system without bugs. But today, you're still not on the bleeding edge, but you are getting buggy software. And evidence of that is there were no announcements around AI, really. They have a translation service that they're adding in, but the Google Chrome browser has been doing that for years. So I don't think it's anything really advanced that people should write home about. The thing they did show off was a new design language. They're calling it liquid glass. It's not being received very well. It doesn't look great. It makes usability of the phone, of the user interface, much harder. My opinion is they're prepping us for an augmented reality product that has not been announced. That's just the impression I get, because they're making a lot of the icons and a lot of the menus translucent. So not fully transparent, but also not just the flat design where there's a completely opaque icon on your phone, which is the most readable thing you can have. And then the liquid part of the name for liquid glasses, these icons resize dynamically. So they come into view, then they collapse out of view. And I think a lot of that is prepping us for a world where we have glasses on or VR headset or something in front of our face where the menus and the interface comes into and out of view. But they just haven't announced that product. So I think that's kind of the long-term vision and why they're making such a unpopular change, and why they feel it's so important and a big thing to announce, when from the outside it looks like just a refresh of the visual design.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody talking about that. So when Jason brought that up to me, it was like, because my initial was, why are they doing this? They spend a lot of money on hardware, because it's actually, their ability to do this is not totally software based. There's some hardware acceleration that also happens. And that's the only reason it would make sense that Apple was so excited about this, and basically everybody else was like, well, why'd you even bother? So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully that means there's more good stuff to come.
Yeah. But they are still missing out on the AI piece. They're way behind. And I think the irony is that Apple really got notoriety as a product company when they launched the iPod. And you could take what was normally like a stack of 10 CDs and then put 100 songs in this little tiny device that you can fit in your pocket. Right now, language models are, kind of condensing all the knowledge on the internet. They could have a device that takes the knowledge of the internet and puts it in a little device in your pocket. But ironically, they're not doing that.
Maybe that's what Johnny Ive's doing.
Yeah, or it's going to come from Johnny Ives and OpenAI. Other news on the page with Tesla, Musk, I guess, is asking for forgiveness. But I think it may have more to do with XAI than Tesla, because Morgan Stanley was doing a $5 billion syndicated loan for XAI last Thursday when the tweets took place, and they just gave up. And they tried again yesterday. And this was a fairly high fixed interest rate, 12%. And Twitter's and XAI have been merged, and there's no revenue there to speak of. I was talking to Mike this morning, Jason, wondering whether Twitter would have an advertising model, and Mike was, not too positive about that, that being able to compete with Meta or Google or, other Amazon, other people that support themselves with advertising. And the subscription model is there, but I don't know that it'll produce enough cash flow to get the amount of money they're spending on Colossus in Memphis. They're going to have to keep raising money, and if they if they're borrowing money at 12%, that's not a good sign. Anything else, Mike or Jason, on that particular part of the Musk activity?
I think we should expect that the new XAI Twitter will eventually get rolled into Tesla.
Yeah. Tesla always has positive cash flow. Rolling that stuff in would not help. Assuming if we just look at page one, it would be about 10% dilution. for the Tesla stockholders. I know Mike and Jason think there's investment merit in Tesla at a lower price, but Jason, do you think there's investment merit, with XAI and Twitter or does that just distract Tesla from its principal task, which is continuing to do well making cars, get full self-driving used everywhere and have humanoid robots? Or, if you have a couple of their line of business, will that make you more or less enthusiastic about Tesla?
It's hard to say because I feel like so much of XAI's work gets rolled into Tesla as it is, it feels like. So they're helping with the infrastructure and software for training the Tesla self-driving features. The AI component's going to be a big part of these robots if they're completing tasks and having to interact with humans. So I guess it makes sense from that perspective to roll XAI into Tesla. But at the same time, it seems like Tesla's already getting the benefits of that relationship without having to buy them. So I don't know. I guess that's the best case.
Yeah, I think Musk is using, you started as a separate entity so you can attract talent that wants to take the risk and get the equity exposure. And then eventually, once it's to the point where it slots in nicely with the main business, in this case Tesla, they can acquire it for stock. So
yeah,
it seems like all the customers of XAI it's Twitter and Tesla. So, sure, Microsoft's going to offer the model, but it's not going to be substantial revenue. So.
Right. On to healthcare before 30 minutes comes up. Last week we had Mike and Jason disagreeing on the UnitedHealth Care. I'd be disappointed, Mike and Jason, if they don't still disagree.
Where was your opinion, Mike? Dismantling it? I've come around to it kind of will be dismantled. So Congress, people that are informed all kind of agree now that we need to replace PBMs with more transparent pricing model from the manufacturer, from the pharma companies. Drug pricing is largely high because the PBMs require it, and the public backlash instead goes to the pharma companies. So if there's transparency there, we can maybe place our public outrage on the appropriate party. So if we do pull out PBMs, and we're starting to see like the first steps of that, ironically, through these GLP-1 drugs. They're very expensive. There's a lot of demand for them. The insurers don't want to pay the prices for them. To meet the demand, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are going direct to consumer and selling right to the patients. So, and we're seeing another company, GoodRx, is a company we need to dig more into. They just announced that they're going to have a program where they're also going to bypass the PBMs to offer drugs, make them available to independent pharmacies at a fixed price markup. So there's starting to be a software-powered solution to replace this middleman, being the PBMs, replace the PBMs with a set price, like kind of distribution network.
And that function of having the pharmaceutical company or medical device company or whatever, having basically a direct-to-consumer line, a way to make sure that they can purchase the product at a fixed price. A bunch of companies have set that up, and it's not a particularly scalable way to do things, but it is what a lot of these companies have come to the conclusion of in order to bypass some of the problems with the system.
And the problems aren't just making your drug available. It's that the PBM will have a formulary and it says you have to try this drug first and this drug second. And then if neither of those work for you, then you can buy this third drug. So these pharma companies will want to, even though they might be approved for a first-line therapy, the PBM says you're really third in line.
Yeah.
So
and this whole line of thinking is actually supports advertising of pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's one of those things that's controversial. We talked about it before, some of the negative things and what percentage of the TV advertising is consumed by pharmaceuticals. But one of the positive things is, well, that does create consumers looking for products for themselves rather than just relying on, in this case, the PBM formulary.
Yeah. So where does that leave a UnitedHealth group if the PBM's gone? They're an insurer. The insurance business has a fixed profit margin as outlined by the Affordable Care Act. If they no longer have these PBMs as a way to drive drug prices higher, and as a consequence, then they can drive their premiums higher to generate more profit at that fixed 15% profit margin. It's just a business that's not going to grow as nearly as quickly as it has in the past.
Yeah. And if you really want to fix this, you've got to fix the business model, because the business model of UnitedHealthcare and these other large insurers is just raise prices faster than your expenditures.
Right.
And you don't have nobody's stopping you from doing that. So you have to fix that. And the first step, I think, is dismantling the PBM.
Yeah. So the insurers on one side, the other end of on the other side of the PBM is a lot of them, they run pharmacies. So, you'll see CVS's. In UnitedHealth Group's case, they run Optum clinics. So they have another lever there where the clinic is maybe a way they could start driving prices higher and then justify increasing premiums. But also some of the discussions that we're talking about are that we're going to have price transparency at the procedure level, so at hospitals and clinics. So if that's the case, then that's not really a lever they have available to pull either. Patients will see the prices at the different clinics, and they'll see the prices at the Optum network are much higher, and they'll either push their employer to change insurance, or the employers will see how much higher the prices are at the Optum network, and they'll make a change. So we see CVS's, with evidence by Walgreens and Rite Aid, that they're not good businesses. CVS won't be a good business if it's only there to be the pharmacy driving drug prices up through the PBM. The clinics won't be that great of a business for UnitedHealth Group either. So I think it's just going to leave them as just a pure play insurer, and they'll be much smaller than they are today.
Anything more on the other? We're kind of running out of time here on Tex or Lantheus or BioNTech or Harrow or.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of other healthcare news too, but Harrow has some interesting news. Earlier this week, they licensed the rights to a steroidal post-operative treatment for pain and inflammation. So it's one of the strongest steroids that we have in use today, but it's not water soluble. So it's used on a lot of skin conditions and applied through a cream. A Taiwanese company figured out how to make that molecule at a nanoparticle scale so that it can be suspended in water and formulated into eye drops. It got FDA approved about 14 months ago, I believe. And the reason Harrow's had the ability to license it this week was this company shopped it in the US market. Bausch & Lomb and Alcon are the biggest, but they have competing products. So they didn't pick up licensing for this drug. The Taiwanese company licenses it to a med device maker. So that it's kind of like I don't know how you call it, a nebulizer to spray eye drops into your eye so you don't have to drop them in. I don't think they have much adoption there, and they didn't really put much effort into the sales process for this anti-inflammatory steroid. So that company made a change, and Harrow was able to license it for $500,000. So not 500 million or anything, 500,000. And
as we like to say, about the price of a condo in San Diego.
Yeah.
Small condo.
Yeah. So, and it has the opportunity to be the best in class treatment. Now there's a lot of generics there, but there is a branded market that has about a third of the post-operative anti-inflammatory eye drops. And this will by far be better than the ones on the market because it's stronger. You apply it twice a day rather than every 4 hours. And it works better when just applying twice a day as well.
Yeah, it's a really nice capital allocation play. It plugs right into their existing sales team. It's totally within their wheelhouse, right? They're specialized in ophthalmology clinics, a market that's too small for the majors to really play well in. So, yeah, we really like this move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. More healthcare news next week. What we'll do is when we finish up with chips, we'll switch into healthcare before we go to page 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the meantime, everyone be well and stay healthy, and we'll be here 7 days from now. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.